Good day, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Albert Arena, Director of the Waltham Museum. Museum located at 7 Viles Court in Waltham. We're open every Sunday 1 to 4:30. As part of our program, we have 16 historical slideshows on old Waltham. And as you can see, the one we have for you today is the history of sports in Waltham. We'll go back over 100 years ago to a point after the Civil War when sports was popular in Waltham in the United States, and we'll go through the years and mention almost 20 sports which occurred here in Waltham. Now, if anyone were to ask you what was probably the first sport promoted in Waltham, I doubt very much where many people could answer that, because it was horse racing. The popularity of the horse racing in England during the Victorian days is probably what brought the interest in the horse racing to the United States and to Waltham. Now, in 1876, John H. Farnham, one of the owners of the Davis and Farnham Foundry, built a Central Park, a horse racing track, half a mile long, on the outskirts of Grove Street in Waltham, and he had some horse races there during that part of the 19th century. Now, in this picture here, you'll see C is Central Park. A is the Howell Button Factory, where Raytheon is today off Willow Street. B is the old Bleachery and Dye Works, where Zayres and now Ames is located. D is the Davis and Farnham Foundry off Sion Street, and way over on the right you can see in the white stucco the Gore Estate. Now, there's a picture of John R. Farnham in 1885, and that's one of his horses, Commonwealth. Now, there's two stories associated with his horse racing days. This horse, Commonwealth, was on the verge of being sold for $25,000 in 1885, but John Farnham refused the offer, and that very same night the horse died during the night for illnesses unknown, and Mr. Farnham was out $25,000. Another occurrence was in 1896. One of his trotters, they had trotter races there, Benson H., broke the mile record, the United States mile record for trotter racing. Benson H. ran the mile in 2 minutes and 19 seconds. Now, this is Pat Carroll. Speaking of breaking miles, he was a mile runner from Waltham. He came from Ireland, lived in Waltham, and he shortly became the fastest mile runner in New England, and he challenged the champion of New York at a racetrack in Springfield, Mass. And in 1896, Pat Carroll ran the mile in 4 minutes 25 seconds, which was a national record. Today, most runners run the mile below the 4-minute mark, but at that time it was quite a feat, and it was accomplished by Pat Carroll of Waltham, who is now in the Waltham Museum Hall of Fame. Now, a sport that was popular in the 19th century was roller polo. It's something like ice skating with roller skates, or street hockey. In 1895, Waltham had the championship roller polo team in the area. And there it is right there, the 5 players and the 2 managers. 2 of the players, Tom Carter and Frank Woodkey, were very, very popular, to the point of being almost heroes, similar to Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb. And one of them, Frank Woodkey, after his days in the roller polo area, worked for the Mets company. He was the leading test driver for the Mets company. They did have a roller polo rink behind Grover Cronin's, but it burned down the early part of the 20th century. Now, a second park was proposed in Waltham due to the popularity of bicycle racing throughout the United States and in Waltham. And these are the plans of the bicycle racing track off South Street. They didn't quite build it this way. The park looked like this when it was completed. That's the starting gate on the left and the grandstands on the right. Today that would be the third baseline of the Connie Mack League. But some great races were held there in the last decade of the 19th century and all the way up to around 1912. In 1900, two men were killed there. Miles and Stafford were killed when there was a motorcycle race occurring there. And of course there were bicycle clubs throughout Waltham. Here you see one at the corner of Bicycle Park and Dartmouth Street. You might notice Coca-Cola 5 cents, and way over on the right, if you look closely, you can see a Barker lumber sign, a lumber company of Waltham. Now with all these other sports going on, the boys at Waltham High preferred another sport called football. And this is the first known picture of Waltham High football team in 1894. Now they didn't, for 8 years, from 1894 to 1902, they played independent games. There was no formal high school league. In 1902, the high school league as we know it today was formed. Here we are in 1898. The Waltham football team is taken from a picture in the News Tribune. And the gentleman up front on the left with the football under his left arm is William Webster. He would later operate William Webster photo studios on Moody Street during 1910s, 20s, and 1930s. But at the bicycle racing track, Waltham High played its football games during that period. They would play the football games until 1906 when they'll move over to Central Park. And here you see the boys playing football in the middle of the racetrack area with an enthusiastic crowd surrounding them. That white portion around the crowd is the racing track. You might notice the building on the right on the hill across from South Street is the old Waltham Hospital. Here they are again playing football. The starting gate of the bicycle racing track's on the right, and there's a shed on the other side where the Orient bicycles were kept. The slogan "Leads the leader," and of course Waltham Hospital's chimney can be seen up on the right there. Now they weren't the only ones that enjoyed football. Private clubs were having football, such as the Waltham Athletic Club, which operated out of Nutting's Boathouse. Here's the football team from that club in 1906. Here's a football team out of Stony Batter, which was where the Babe Ruth field is today. It was a popular place for football, baseball, and swimming. But in 1902, as I said before, the high schools all got organized and had a regular high school football league. And for the first 3 years, Waltham High won the Eastern Championship. The coach of the team was Nate Tufts. He's the man in the center with the tie on. Nate Tufts would coach the team from 1902 to 1910. And he would compile a remarkable record of 103 wins, 2 ties, and 4 losses during his 8-year stint at Waltham High. He would later become Middlesex District Attorney. But he used to take his teams up to New Hampshire for the weekend and train them just like they'd train a boxer. that stayed, eat the proper food, exercise, and they took it real serious. Now, two of the stars in that team were Harry Dad White and Lenny Taylor, and they would get better as years go on till they were real outstanding players in the year 1905. By the way, that picture was taken behind Waltham the old Waltham High School, the back steps of old Waltham High School, where Central High School is today. Now, of course, the sport of baseball. As we all know, that 1876, the old National Baseball League was formed, and that was the same year Central Park was built, by the way. And the first of four major leaguers that come from Waltham played for the old National Baseball League. His name was Frank Bernard Cox, Runt Cox. He played shortstop for the old Detroit team of the National League. One of his distant relatives, John Cox, teaches at Waltham High School today. He teaches history, and he also teaches the history of Waltham. But baseball from the National League level trickled down to local levels, and here we see a Waltham team, the Emmett Literary Association, in 1895. Emmett was a hero from Old Ireland, a poet and a hero, so this was an Irish-based team in Waltham. The coach of the team was Frank Leary, up in the top left, and his young son, 4-year-old Jack Leary, was the mascot, as you see here in the center. And of course, we'll be talking more about Jack Leary as time goes on. Another team representing the Bleachery area, these are private semi-pro type teams, were the Beacons, as we see here. And once again, like most of the sports teams during that period, were mostly consist of Irish, sons of Irish immigrants. There's the Beacons again, 1902 and 1903. I'll read some of the names: Eddie Ford, Bill Bailey, John Donnelly, Bob Kempton, Billy Ilby, and there they are. Now, over on the south side, there was a team that was always playing the Beacons, big rivalry, the Volunteers. Now, these teams used to start off with young boys, 15, 16, and the boys would stay with the teams until they got older. Now, that's an earlier picture of the Volunteers, and that's a later picture of the Volunteers. One of the men, the coach in the center, the gentleman on his right, is named Jib Silver, and we were able to meet him later on in life. He was a contemporary of Nipper Mars, but a great catcher for the old Volunteers. The Beacons changed their name to the St. John team in 1905, and that's what they look like. They played their games at Stony Batter. And the St. Joseph's had a baseball team. St. Joseph's was the French church at that time. Many French Canadians were on this team. Now, getting to another sport, basketball. Basketball, as we know, was started by Mr. Nesmith out in Springfield. And the first basketball team in Waltham was Company F of the National Guard. And that's their team in 1895, 1896. Probably they were the first basketball team because they were the only ones that had a gym to play basketball in. But they played for many years at the National Guard Armories, and one of the players, the fellow on the right in the middle row, was Ned Harrington. And we'll be seeing him a little bit later. Meanwhile, Waltham High continues to play under Nate Tufts. That's Nate Tufts on the right. 1906. Here they won 14 games, and they only tied one, Roxbury, no losses. The boy on the right, the second boy on the right in the foreground, is Jack Leary. He's not quite playing for the team yet. He's He's only in the 9th grade at this point. But this was a great team with Marsh and Mosier being great players of the 1906 team. That, by the way, is the first year they were playing at Central Park. And this is the second year they're playing at Central Park. And by this time, they've reached their peak. They're the greatest football team in the area and probably the greatest football team in Waltham High's history, because they compiled 365 points for and only 5 points against during their 13 wins and no losses of the year. So we'll have to go down the line and show who was on this great 1907 football team. On the left is Nate Tufts, the coach. Right halfback Jack Leary is next to him. Then there's Moki Gravison, the fullback, followed by his left tackle brother Pete Gravison. Left end Walter Stankett. Left guard Patsy Partridge. The captain with the football is Clyde Harron. Next to him is left halfback Flat Ashley. Then the center Doug Hayes. The quarterback Irving Frame, became a doctor, I believe. Right end Monty Carlton, and finally right guard Carl Wright. All giants in Waltham High football history. There they are at Central Park taking their picture. Now here's the 1908 team. And once again they go through the season undefeated with 13 wins. The one loss occurred in their final playoff game with Mount Hope of Rhode Island. By the way, that broke a long string of victories without a defeat. There's the 1908 team, the top 11 of the team, the starters. And of course, that's Jack Leary and Walter Stankett. Now, they compiled a record of 45 wins without a defeat. They had a few ties, and that record held till 1956, when it was broken by Concord. This cartoon by Gene Mack in the Boston Globe depicts the breaking of this record. You might notice Beanie Mosier, all scholastic end of the 1906 team, Jack Leary and Walter Stankett in the center, and there's Harry Dad White, of the captain of the 1905 team. And over on the right is, they lost their last game to the Hope Street High of Rhode Island in 1908 due to a drop kick by Eddie Beyer. The 1909 team continued on its winning ways, winning 13 and losing 1 to Somerville. Now here's some rare clippings from old newspapers. Here you see Leary scoring on an end play of so many yards, and you might notice right off the bat that he's not wearing a helmet. And wearing helmets, some of the players during the 1907 and 8 period. They'd be forced to wear them later on. Here's a 1909 picture from the Boston Globe showing Tom Smith, the quarterback, throwing a score to Evans, the end. I believe taken at the athletic field in Waltham. Once again, we see Jack Leary rushing through the line, the Everett line, in an attempt to score a goal. In 1911, they played their first game at the athletic field off Bacon Street. And this is the team that participated in those 1911 games. And they had a good team. They had 11 wins and 2 losses. A lot of the old timers have left. Jack Leary has left and Walter Stankett has left. But a new bunch of heroes are coming on the scene, led by Cliff Richardson and Alfred Cobb and Rollo Fagan and Pete Pendlebury and Frank Healy. In the history of Waltham sports, the main sport is the high school football. A lot of them approach it, but it's the Waltham football games that brought the most interest through all these many years. Here's the 1912 team. 10 wins, 1 tie, and 2 losses. Show you some of the scores. Waltham 41, Marlborough nothing. Waltham 40, New Bedford nothing. Waltham 14, Milford nothing. Waltham 14, Providence Tech nothing. Waltham 35, Natick nothing. Waltham 28, Brockton 3. Waltham 10, Somerville nothing. Brookline 3, Waltham 0. That's one of their losses. And Bangor, Maine 21, Waltham nothing. That was a loss. Newton, we beat Newton 3-0. We beat Portland, Maine 35-0. Quincy we beat 48-3, and Cambridge Latin we tied 7-7. Great players in those days. Here's the 1913 team, which graduated in 1914, and they're having their picture taken in the front steps of the old Waltham High School. The coach at that time was Harry Dane. He took over from Nate Tufts. He's the fellow on the top left. Now, many of the pictures in this collection of sports scenes came from Ed Daly, probably one of the greatest sports fans in Waltham's history. Half of them came from the Nippermar collection, and half of them came from Ed Daly by way of Mr. Provach and the owner of the Brentwood Bowling, the Wallex Bowling Alleys. Now, Ed Daly was a cartoonist, and he drew Rollo Fagan's cartoon here, picture, who was a star of the 1912-1913 team. He led the team in punting and drop kicking. He was also an outstanding pitcher on the 1912, 1913, and 1914 teams. Because the boys were also playing baseball at this time, and most of the boys that played football were also on the baseball team, as you see here. Alfred Cobb, and we'll go down this list. Alfred Cobb is first, Seth Johnson is next, Rollo Fagan is third. Then there was Ashwood, Charlie McCabe, Stick Day, and the others we have listed somewhere else. Now, once again, other schools were playing baseball. LaSalle, a Catholic school, which later became St. Mary's School, is having their picture taken with their team they'll be playing that day. Team from New Hampshire. LaSalle's on the right, the opposing team's on the left. Now, meanwhile, what were the fans doing in Waltham, the average fans? Well, here's a fan that's supporting the Boston Red Sox in 1911. You notice the fellow on the left has a Waltham flag, but the Boston Red Sox were known as the Boston Americans in 1911. And the fellow in the center, in the back row in the center, is Ned Harrington, who was once a player on the basketball team for Company F, the first basketball team. Up in Prospect Hill, there was a group, a Prospect Club, taking their picture October 15th, 1911, and they were interested in hunting and camping. That sport occurred in Waltham. Now, what happened to Jack Leary? Well, Jack Leary became a first baseman for the St. Louis Browns, and on May 12, 1914, the St. Louis Browns came to Fenway Park to play the Red Sox, and all the Walthamites went over there to have a Jack Leary Day at Fenway Park. And Ed Daly drew a cartoon of that Leary Day in 1914. Now, this is an interesting picture of Waltham in 1914. It's the corner of Pine, Crescent, and Moody Street, and all the men are out in the street. some women. Picture was given to us, and the donor knew it was on Moody Street, but didn't know what it was all about. Well, it's outside Flannery's Brothers smoke shop. They sold cigars and pipes and so forth. And in the window, by using the microscope, you can see they're posting a World Series game between the Boston Braves and the Philadelphia A's on October 12, 1911. It's the third inning. You can't quite make it out, but it's the third inning, and the Braves and the Philadelphia A's are tied 1-1. But here they are, all standing out in the streets, waiting for the ticker tape, the wireless, to bring in the scores of the World Series in 1914. Of course, radio and television weren't around in those days, and they had to wait for the wireless to bring in the information. Just so happens that the Miracle Braves won the World Series 4-0 over the great Philadelphia Athletics, headed by Connie Mack. They called them the Miracle Braves because they were in last place in the middle of July, and they wound up winning the pennant and winning the World Series. But that was a very unique picture of Waltham. And as I said, baseball was also very popular. Now, the Waltham Watch Company had a number of 6 teams. 6 teams for different departments. Here's the flat steel department baseball team of the Waltham Watch Company. Fellow we know is in the middle row on the left, Waldo Havey. He was the brother of the Havey twins. Now here's another Waltham Watch Company team, the Jewel baseball team, and they used to play the flat steel department baseball team at Bicycle Park. Here's enthusiastic supporters from the Waltham Watch Company going down Bicycle Park to watch a game between the Jewel department and the flat steel department. Getting back to football, Waltham, we'll be getting back to football. In 1915, they were undefeated, led by Cliff Richardson, who you see with the football there in the center. One of his halfbacks to his right is Francis Bacon. He would be killed during World War I. Many of these men, by the way, would be going into the war in 1917, 1918. And the Boston Globe had a cartoon of Cliff Richardson. And also another star was on the rise, Charlie McGann, who you see in the top cartoon. He had it all to himself when he scored the 5th touchdown over Marlborough on the opening day when they won 33-0. His fullback Richardson receiving a high pass to punt in Waltham's early in the game against Portland, Maine, 1915. Another man in that team who later was All-American from Dartmouth was Swede Youngstrom. Many of these men I'm mentioning also were on the Waltham Football Hall of Fame. Here's the 1916 team, and the captain of this team, Cliff Richardson, had graduated. The captain with the ball is Charlie McGann. He would become all scholastic and be on the Waltham Football Hall of Fame. Later he would become the gym instructor at the South Junior High School for many years. Just so happens his daughter lives in Brockton, and Charlie McGann's grandson played for Brockton High in the last 2 years. Unfortunately, as they beat Waltham High in some tough losses. But the new coach of the team now is Norman Frad. He's up in the top left. Here's a cartoon. Charlie McGann runs for a touchdown, and he features in Waltham High School victory. This is all Scholastic of the Boston Herald in 1916. Charlie McGann over on the right end. Waltham had 3 players in that team. The left end was, the quarterback was Frank Smith, and the left end was Rodney Cole, the fellow you see on the top left. 3 all Scholastics on the all Boston, Metropolitan Boston team. Now they didn't play football 1918 because of the war, and they revived football again in 1919, as you can see here. Now they're on the verge of changing football coaches again, and they're hiring Jack Leary. Jack Leary, as we told you, was last known to be the first baseman for the St. Louis Browns, but he was beaten out by George Sisler for that job, and George Sisler is now in the Baseball Hall of Fame. And Jack Leary, well, the war came along, and Jack Leary went into the Navy as an ensign, saw some action as a gunnery officer on the ship. But after the war, he came back to Waltham and became the coach of Waltham High from 1920 to 1948. One of his first stars for Jack Leary was this captain, Errol Buzz Hogan. And this is what Bicycle Park looked like in 1920. It's where the Senior Diamond is today, but the racing track would be way over on the left. Now, the Waltham Watch Company, they sort of dropped their 6-department baseball team league and got into a city league with teams such as W.H. Nichols and J.L. Thompson's and B.C. Ames. And this was the Waltham Watch Company team. And the Waltham Watch Company also had a bowling league. And that's the Flat Steel Department Bowling League bowling team. And we do know one person, the person sitting in the middle, the front row is Streeter. His name was, well, he was, I forget his first name, but his name was Streeter. Louis Streeter. And they used to bowl at the Riverside Bowling Alley, which was in the corner of Crescent and Ward Avenue. It's a private club for the Waltham Watch Company, where there was swimming and bowling and basketball. That's the bowling alley at the Riverside Bowling Alley. Now also this period, was speaking of sports, there was a great rifle shooter from Waltham. He belonged to the 9th Massachusetts Company of the National Guard, and he was world famous as a rifle shooter. His name was Joseph T. Lawless. This picture came from a paper in Philadelphia. And Joseph T. Lawless would go on to win the gold medal for the 1,000-yard shoot in the 1920 Olympics. Now back to football again. The second great star under Jack Leary's team was this Lawrence Lowry, the quarterback. And he would be an outstanding player, one of Waltham High's all-time best. Here's the 1922 team. As you can see, Jack Leary's the coach on the left there with the white shirt. And Lawrence Lowry's in the center, in the middle of the tall fellow in the middle in the front row. Now at LaSalle High School, which later was Catholic high school, later became St. Mary's, a fellow was graduating. Joseph Nipamau was graduating. And this was his graduating class in 1922. And if you look under the word high, the second man under the word high is Joseph Nipamau. Shortly after graduating from this high school, he would become LaSalle's baseball coach for several years. Then he would become a coach of Waltham Watch baseball team, and then he'd go on to organize the Waltham City Club Baseball League and other teams. We'll be talking more about Joseph Nipamau as time goes by. Here's the 23 team, Waltham High. There's some interesting members in this group. In in the first row, would like to go down the first row, you see Herman Ferrick on the left. He's in the Football Hall of Fame. Next to Ferrick is Walter Bryn. The third fellow is Walter Bryn with a big smile. He would become the hockey coach of Waltham for many years. Next to Walter Bryn is Captain Bob Ward, and then Dudley Bell, then Lawrence Lowry, the quarterback. All great players of the 23 team. The 26 team was also great. They were undefeated. And they starred Tony Ciano, the second from the right in the backfield. And the center was Rick Concannon, two of the men who led the great 1926 football team, undefeated football team. The Catholic schools were turned out good players too. Here's the 1932 St. Charles High School championship team. Now, in 1927, John Daly graduated from Waltham High School, and he was a boxer. He was a bantamweight boxer. He became the national bantamweight boxing champion of the United States, and he represented the United States in the 1928 Olympics. And here he is on the SS Roosevelt in Amsterdam, Holland, as they participated in the 1928 Olympics. And he almost won the gold medal. It was disputed, but he did win the silver medal, and it was a great thing. And he's in the Waltham Museum Hall of Fame as one of Waltham's great boxers of the past. Now, 1929, there's a couple of more stars at Waltham High. Bill Pendergast on the left, and Donald Binker Smith on the right, the quarterback. Pendergast was a back. Here they are taking their picture in front of Waltham High School. Number 1 is Don Binker Smith with the ball, and number 5 is Pendergast. Jack Leary's in the top left. Ed Daly would draw a picture of Pendergast, the greatest warrior of them all, he called Pendergast. And if you see the list down below, he lists Mullins and Taylor and Harry White, and Jack Leary, Stankard, Rollo Fagan, Cliff Richardson, Phelan, Lawrence Lowry, Holmberg, Ward, Ryan, Pendergast. But according to Ed Daly, Pendergast was the boy that is the best ever. Now, meanwhile, what happened to Tony Ciano? Tony Ciano went to Fordham and played under Frank Cavanaugh, the Iron Major at Fordham, under some great teams during the last part of 1928-29, and they even made a movie of the Iron Major. And there's Tony Ciano with Frank Cavanaugh. By the way, the quarterback of those teams was Jack Fisher, who would later come to Waltham High as a coach, taking Jack Leary's place in 1948. But Tony Ciano was the great All-American center from Fordham University, 1929-1930. And he passed away about 2 or 3 years ago. There's a picture of the 34 team with another bunch of great players in Waltham High's past, such as Frank Guzziano, Ernie Swatzer, John Kroll, Howie Kelly, and Jim Connolly. Now, in 1937, this girl, Elsie Mae Cheney, who graduated from Waltham High in 1930, wrote the song "Give a Cheer for Waltham," and it became the official football song of the school. It was published by H. Howard Cheney of Rich Street in Waltham. Now, still there were other events, sporting events going on through Waltham, and here's a boat race starting to the left of the Moody Street Bridge as you stand in what is now the Grover Cronin's parking lot. Over on the other side of the river is the Felton Street area. But they're having this 1930 Charles River race. Now on postcards you find these races, such as the Indian War Canoe race, which occurred on the Charles River in Waltham. That boathouse is the Waltham Canoe Club off of Ward Avenue, in the same area where Nichols, W.H. Nichols was located. And they had some great canoe races during the years. They also had barrel races, as you see here on a postcard. And you try to get across the river without your barrel. If your barrel got loaded with water, it would sink, you'd lose the race. But they had a lot of fun boating on the Charles. But baseball continued to get popular. Nipper Mars down there now with his Waltham City clubs, playing many, many games. And as you can see, the diamond, which is now the senior diamond, is becoming very much improved since what it looked like in 1920. You might notice that popcorn stand in the front right there, operated by Keogh. His son would be one of the hostages during the, Bill Keogh would be one of the hostages during that Iran crisis, 1979. But he was selling popcorn there in 1934. Now in 1935, Jack Leary is now in his 15th year coaching Waltham High. He has won 109 games, lost 38 and tied 13, and they give him a day at Nuttings, a testimonial at Nuttings, and this cartoon was in the local papers. Some of his players, like Pendergast, went to different colleges. Ciano went to Fordham, Concana went to NYU. Meanwhile, Walter Bryn became the hockey coach of the team, and he turned out some great hockey teams during the year, 4 championship teams. Here we see the team with one of its greatest hockey players, Art Shaughnessy, the fellow in the front row without a letter on his shirt. He's considered one of the greatest of them all. Jack Crow was also in that team. Bryn, Frenchie Bryn as they called him, was in the top right, coach of the hockey team. Here's Shaughnessy on the right, Jack Crowell's in the center, and C. Harvey's on the left. Just so happens that Shaughnessy became a Marine sergeant during World War II, and he was killed in the Pacific. Action in the Pacific during World War II. Others enjoyed skating in Waltham. Here's some girls ice skating on the ice outside Nuttings Ballroom during the middle of the winter. Now here's the Governor Gore estate. A very, I wouldn't say unusual, but a rare thing happened. After the Mets company went out of business, they put a 9-hole golf course here, and golf was played here in the 1920, 22, 20, up until 1935, in the middle of the Depression, where it went out of business. It was acquired by the Governor Gore Society. It's now a museum. But for 10 or odd years or so, they had played golf there at the Governor Gore estate. There was also a golf course, the Trapello Golf Course, which was mostly in Weston, but 2 of the golf holes were in Waltham. Now what we have here is the boys swimming. Swimming was popular in the Charles in the summer. You could swim at Forest Grove, you could swim at Stony Batter, or you could swim at some illegal spots such as sides or trees or off the bridges or in the canal. But they did have some formal races. There was the half-mile race from Prospect Street Bridge to the Moody Street Bridge, and there was a 3-mile race from Auburndale to the Moody Street Bridge. But when the war came, World War II came, the river became polluted, these races ceased to exist. What happened to the old Beacon Bleachery team. Well, they're now called the Ramblers in 1936. And here's a picture. They're taken. The Ramblers would play the Nipper teams and the out-of-city teams like Medford and Everett and so forth. But here's their 1936 team. Likewise, this Nipper Mars team, this year he's calling it the Cottage Crest team, and they're in the Boston Suburban Twilight League. There's a picture of the Cottage Crest at the main diamond at Bicycle Park in the 30s. And the old Waltham Federal Savings Bank display window had commencement for Waltham City Club in the 1930s. There's Nipper Mar receiving an award from Mayor Hanson. His catcher Bill Sullivan's on the right. There's Bill Sullivan putting someone out at home plate. In 43, in the middle of the war, Waltham High has another championship team. They go undefeated. This little football brochure was made for that year and shows the scores. Their victories, 176 points for and 12 points against. That's a picture of their team. Back row was Tony Romano, Bob Driscoll, Mike Kalopoulos, and Ernie Zeno, along with Bill Smith. And Ed Daly would draw a cartoon for the 43 team. The 44 team was almost as good. And here's a picture of the 44 team. Okay, what you have here is the Waltham High School football team of 1944 again. They're having their picture taken. I mean, they're having their cartoon made up in the Boston Herald. Some of the names are familiar. Bill O'Brien's the quarterback. You might know in the bottom row, you see Lorne MacArthur played for the team, and Bill Creonte, who now runs Creonte Tire. There was also Alex Winkus, and a lot of good players of that team. There are also some semi-pro teams throughout Waltham. This team was known as Rock Alley. The fellows came from the Felton Street area. A lot of sons of Italian immigrants, the Girolamos, the Velados, the Newtleys, the Miliottos. It was a very good team. It did have some Eddie Barry on it, George Barry, and some Poiriers on it, but it was a very good semi-pro team in the last part of 1940, 47, 48. They also had a bowling team. There's the Hurley brothers, John and Tom Hurley, appeared on WHDH television bowling show many times. Bowling was always popular in Waltham. There was the Corinthian bowling alleys underneath the Waldorf, operated by Ike Allen. Later he moved over to the Brentwood bowling alleys where the supermarket is. And then there was the Waltham City alleys and other alleys. Great bowlers such as Tracy Sanborn, Heine Bent, Wiley Foote, Fred Marcel, Bernie DeMel, and many, many other great bowlers in Waltham's past. Here's the 47 baseball team, and our present coach, Al Scafidi, was the shortstop of that team. He's the one kneeling second on the left, the shorter fellow kneeling on second on the left. Also on the team is Lorne MacArthur, on the top right. He's former principal of the Kennedy High School, junior high school. And on a standing third on the right is Norman Roy, who would go on to become a pitcher for the Boston Braves. Now, Ed Daly drew a cartoon of Norman Roy. He was the fourth player to play Major League Baseball from Waltham. He played for the Boston Braves in 47, 48. And if his arm didn't become sore, he would have been on the 48 World Series games with Cleveland. As I said, there was Frank Cox in the 19th century, Jack Leary, Norman Roy, and then there was also a Halfpenny, a Cliff Halfpenny, in 1921, who played for the Chicago White Sox as second baseman. Now here's three great sports figures of Waltham's past. Normie Roy is accepting an award from Jack Leary in the center and Joseph Nipper on the left. Now in 1947, the Boston Post put out this cartoon of the 10 top athletes in Waltham's history. And we'll go through them. Art Shaughnessy's the hockey player in the top left. Swede Youngstrom's way over on the left. Tom Smith, the quarterback of the 1908 and 1909 teams. Lawrence Lowry, his pitch was torn away from this cartoon, but he was the quarterback in the 23-22 team. Jack Leary, of course, in the center. Tony Ciano, right to the left of Jack Leary, and then there was Bill Pendergast of the 1929 teams. Normie Roy, Ira Hardy, the great lineman, was an All-American tackle from Harvard. And then there was Jim Haney, who almost made the major leagues as a pitcher. He pitched some no-hitters at Waltham. In the late 40s, basketball was big in Waltham. Waltham teams were entering the Tech Tourney at Boston Gardens many years in a row, and led by this fellow right here, Walter Bartlett, shown entering Boston Garden, preparation of a Tech Tourney game in 1949. Then those years, it was Jitterbug Joe Tarasi, one of Waltham High's great, averaged an amazing 7.1 yards per carry in his career at Waltham High School. He would go on to play for Boston University. There's the Waltham High School football team of 49, and you might notice number 26 is Jack Dodona, the present superintendent of the school of Waltham High School. Then in 48, each year the various papers would put out all scholastic teams. We had one on this team, Paul Milner, top left tackle, top left, the second one in the top left. A few years later, we had this great running back, Eddie Beck, receiving an award from Nipper Maher and Mayor Turner. And the fellow on the top left is Bill Hartnett, the manager of the Embassy Theater. Then in 48, Jack Fisher would take over as coach from Jack Leary. And Jack Fisher, as I mentioned before, was the quarterback of the great Fordham team of 1929 and 30. He would only stay with Waltham about a few years, 6 years. He'd go on to Weymouth and compile an even greater record, bringing Weymouth to many championships during the 1950s and 60s. Here's a reunion of all the great Waltham High football players of the past. Meanwhile, at Bicycle Park, Nipper noticed that they were losing interest in baseball. With the upcoming of television, people were staying home watching their television sets. So he puts on 2 donkey games to try to bring their interest back. And here's one on August 2nd, 1948, where the players would hit the ball, jump on a live donkey, and go to first base and so forth. They had a lot of fun, but didn't quite catch on. So we had a couple of reunions. Here's his reunion with the last of the Bleachery Old Timer games on Lowell Field in 1948. See Wiley Foote there, Nipper's in the center. And many of his great players, including Gyp Silver, who we mentioned earlier, Jaime Green, Wiley Foote, Krug Cronin, many others. So Nipper retired after 25 years of managing, and this article was in the local paper. But he didn't stay retired too long. You noticed that kids were still playing sandlots, unorganized, and so he came back and he organized the Waltham's Little League. Had uniforms for the kids, umpires, scorekeepers, well organized, one of the first Little League organizations in the United States. And here they are marching down Moody Street. And here they are at a dedication ceremony or playing the national anthem at the same field that the City Club used to play on, except it's been shortened for the smaller players, of course. as the main senior diamond right there at Nipamar Park today, old bicycle park. And they got a lot of support from the Waltham Little League mothers. They were just great through the years, and they still are, supporting the Little League teams. Nippers are now in their 38th year of operation, 39th year, still going strong. Here's a Little League mother arguing with an umpire over a call. And the mothers would even play their sons in baseball. Here, the boys are up at bat and the mothers are in the field. But this mother was catching. If she doesn't turn her glove around fast, she won't be catching too long because she's going to get that ball right in her hand. Now, in 1955, they give Nipper a day at Fenway Park, and his little leaguers go to a Red Sox game. Here they're taking a picture with Lou Boudreau, the manager of the Red Sox, at Fenway Park on Nipper Day. And Nipper, of course, had his banquets every year. He still does. Here he's giving a special award to his longtime friend and supporter, Jaime Green. And there were other teams throughout the city. There was the Pioneer League, the Pony Leagues, and the American Legions, and they won awards. In 1956, they won the national championship. Today, the Connie Mack turned out very good teams. They're always in the World Series, 6 years in a row in the World Series, and they even won the championship recently. Al Scaffidi's been big in these organizations. He formed the Stan Musial League a number of years ago, which is highly successful. Men like Jack Dennis organized the Connie Mack League, and others organized the Babe Ruths and the Mickey Mantle Leagues. You might notice the fellow on the right is Frank Guzziano, an old Waltham football player who later played pro football. Up until recently, there were clinics, baseball clinics for the players here. Here, old Eddie Pellegrini is teaching the boys about the fundamentals of baseball at Nipamar Park. Some of them almost make it to the major leagues. One came pretty close, was this Paul Cacciatore. But in the football area, we had several make it. First of all, Angelo Mosca here, one of Waltham High greats of the 60s, is in the Hall of Fame of the Canadian Football League. Mosca would later go on to become a professional wrestler, and here he's shown grabbing Mike Rotundo's hair. Mosca was also the champion of the Southern Eastern Division. Then, of course, probably the greatest of them all is Fred Smirlis. Fred not only made the major leagues, the National Football League, but he's been on the All-Stars, the Pro League, for 5 times. Quite an accomplishment. As I mentioned, as we're going through, a local group has been naming members to the Football Hall of Fame, and this was their first number of selections. Most of the men we've been talking about. And then, of course, there was Joe Lazaro, who wrote this book, The Right Touch, about golf. Then there was skiing and sledding at Prospect Hill. That was one of our sports. But through all these years, one sport probably goes back 6,000 years, fishing on the Charles, one quiet sport. Here they are fishing by the Nuttings Pilings. Anyway, there's Nipamar Park today, old bicycle park. A lot of memories are there. And here we see Nipper reminiscing, looking out over the field, thinking of all the outs, the hits, all the past. Years and years of baseball and football. And that will conclude our history of sports in Waltham.